Sit right down and I'll show you where my dreams began.
I'm Michael Dugan, your culinary host, guiding you through the chef's journey. Join me at the chef's table, where you'll experience stories, secret sauces, signature dishes, and kitchen disasters.
Ultimately, Michael, I got involved with teaching. I never thought I could do it.
Please share that.
It was an opportunity. My family sold the business, and I had an opportunity to go back up to Portland and become a teacher. And I thought I loved my education there. I think I can teach. I don't know. I'll never forget the very first day.
Who inspired you there? Can you give a shout out to anyone?
Who inspired me at the school? Well, there were a lot of people. I think the major inspiration for me at that school was a gentleman by the name of Nick Fluge. He's no longer with us, but Nick was a front of the house guy. He was a wine guy. He was a sales guy.
Sure.
Ended up being the president of the school. But what Nick had, and Nick was a big guy, 6'4", just a massive human being, a great presence. He loved taking care of people.
I love it. Oh,
God,
I
made
love
people laugh.
And so do you, by the way. I know this in your
That's
soul.
all Nick. It's all Nick, right?
It's amazing. I was going to say, President. That's amazing.
I learned a lot from Nick.
Yeah.
And there were so many people. There was a young man that went through school with me. His name was George Thompson, and George was a laborer, right? He was a mechanic. But he was one of the most gifted artists I'd ever seen. And we learned this as we started going through school. Like, I'll never forget during Easter, one of our assignments was to decorate eggs, and George shows up with this stuff that looks like it'd been done by a laser. It was so amazing. And then chefs, like there was a chef there, an Austrian chef named Franz Poplar, who was a competition chef. And he noticed George, and he took George to Germany a few times to create centerpieces for him. Franz, it's a fun story. Franz, towards the end of my education, Franz came up to me and said, "I'd like you to train with me, and we'll go to Germany and we'll compete." And so I called my father and said, "Hey, Chef Franz would like me to go to Germany with him and compete." And my dad says, "What does it pay?" And I said, "Well, Dad, it doesn't pay anything." And he says, "I'll see you next week."
Oh my gosh. What happened though? Come on. What happened? I'm dying. I love learning about competitions and
Franz Poplar did really well. So I don't know if you know anything about the Culinary Olympics.
I was just reading about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's called. It happens every 4 years.
You got to share with our listeners and your listeners.
Yeah, it's experience. Think about, why wouldn't we have a Culinary Olympics, right?
Oh,
so, there's a lot of culinary competition around the country. You just have to look for it, right? I've done a little bit myself, but the Culinary Olympics is this opportunity for countries around the world to come together for every 4 years.
Wow.
It takes place in Germany, and there's all kinds of categories, right? Hot food, cold food, hot, pastry, so on and so forth. George went with Franz, and he wasn't on, I don't know if he was on the U.S. team, but you could be on a U.S. team, you could be on a military team, you can be on a regional team, you can be on a state team, wherever somebody gets sponsoring, right? But it's very regal. The pageantry is amazing, right? Just like the Olympics, right? That we're experiencing right now in Paris.
Yeah.
So the chefs march in. And that's what I love about this industry. And that's what I love about what Auguste Escoffier did for us. Think about, we're in these beautiful jackets, and there's a reason for these jackets, right? They say, depends on who you talk to and where you are, but they say that the military, it had nothing to do with the culinary at the time, but they say that the military garb that Napoleon put his soldiers in was so beautiful, and it was double-breasted, right? And the reason it was double-breasted is that after they were stained from war, if you will, and then they came into the towns, Napoleon wanted his soldiers to be very presentable. So they would flip the jackets. And that Escoffier was in the military for a long time as well.
That's why.
And he brought that to the kitchen. And if you do any research at all on the French Revolution, you learn that in the early days, there was a reason for clogs, right? clogs were on chefs so that they could stand a little higher than the soot and the fumes that were coming from the ovens, right? They'd elevate themselves a little bit so that they could breathe. And the reason they had little caps on their head was because that soot would go to the ceiling and then fall on their heads, right? So everything about what we do, aprons and baggy jackets and such, was all to protect chefs in the heat of the kitchen, right?
Wow.
And then when the bourgeoisie revolted during the French Revolution, most of the aristocracy, they were fearful of being poisoned, right? They all had personal chefs that they trusted. They also had clergy that they trusted, right? Whether that was Christianity or Lutheran or whatever it was. So when the revolution took place, they wanted to hold on to these cooks. So they disguised them in the wardrobes of the clergy. And that's where the chef toque came to be. Okay. And again, even if I'm making all of that up, Michael, it
sounds beautiful.
Such a good story. Yeah.
It is a really good story. Now I'm going to be Googling after this. I'm going to be like, wait a minute.
There's many stories, but all kind of lead to the same path. Yeah.
Well, I love the idea of the chef coat, and you could get it dirty on one side and you can flip it. That never even came to my mind.
Well, think about a chef owner today that might be in the back cranking out a bunch of meals and then going
then they go to the front
room,
absolutely.
They need to look presentable, right?
Right.
So my wife calls it a costume, but yeah, I love it. When I was the vice president of education for Le Cordon Bleu for many years, I really supported competition because it challenged our chef instructors. And it was fun, right?
Yeah.
Against a criteria other than our own. And so I felt like if I asked chef instructors to do that, I had to do the same.
Okay.
So when I had time, I competed. And what I loved about competition was that you may not think this, but the judges who are always chefs and maybe your peers, they're really pulling for you. They're really pulling for you. They're so positive about a technique, maybe a new technique that they haven't seen, and you always learn something. I remember the first time I ever competed, I received a silver medal, and I'm sure I cried, and I have that medal somewhere. And
which competition was this?
It was a American Culinary Federation competition in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, of all places. I lived in Chicago at the time, so it wasn't that difficult. But there's competitions all over the place. There's competitions at the coast. There's competitions in Texas. There's barbecue competitions all over the country, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And some people take it super serious, right? I mean, really serious. But it's one of the most famous competitions in the world. I mentioned Philippe Tessier is the Bocuse d'Or, right? So every 2 years, countries from around the world, regions now nominate and dedicate at least one team, right? One primary chef and then a commis chef, right?
Right.
And they have X amount of time to execute a very challenging dish. And it's named after Paul Bocuse, one of the most famous chefs ever to live. And what I love about it is that it challenges people to go well beyond what they think they can do, right? And the United States has a lot of backing for the Bocuse now, mostly through the work of Daniel Boulud and Thomas Keller and Gavin Kaysen and others, Philip, that got involved. But historically, France, Germany, Switzerland, the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, they put a lot of time and energy into competitions like that. And they do, quite honestly, right now, they're at the top of the hill. They're the countries that are winning competitions almost every 2 years. Yeah. It's really,
don't chefs in Europe kind of start at 10 years old?
Well, like my dad or anyone in a vocation, right? In Europe, it's very natural. 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And if you're not going to go the university route, you are going to go the vocational route. Yep. So and that includes being a doctor. If you're going to become a doctor in Europe, you're going to start studying very early.
We got to catch up.
Yeah. Well, we do a lot of really great things in America. Education is available to a lot of people, but there's something really special about tradition, right? There's something really special about learning from others. And that's what I've always found fascinating about education. So a student comes to school, maybe they come to school with us, and they get exposed to so many different people who have other life experiences, and they bring those into the kitchens, into the classrooms, and the hallways of our school. So it's not just learning how to grill, but it's learning how to walk around in the kitchen, how to communicate with people if you have something hot in your hands, and create a community and talk about what you want to do in life. So many students come here with an idea of what they want to do, and they leave with a completely different idea of what they will do, right? So big fan of education in any form.
So let's get into this. I've been thinking about this a lot. Can you share a couple successes of your students? Where have they gone off to? What have they done when they came through Escoffier and they kind of worked themselves through things? I'd love to know about someone who didn't have any experience that went on to do something in the culinary world. But I'd also love to hear about a couple of them, if you could give an example.
Receive $10 off your next purchase with Voices for Chefs 10.
You don't know what to make for dinner again? You want to explore new cuisines but you don't have time? What if you have new inspirations and we provide you with the ingredients and recipes? We know you want to travel, learn new foods, explore the world, but life's responsibilities keep getting in your way. What if you can bring those experiences to your home neatly packed into a box? Ladybug Collective is a subscription service that finds real people from around the world to create beautifully curated assortments of recipes, ingredients, and cultural content. Not only do we include cultural ingredients, but also a set of detailed recipe cards with instructions on how to use them. Each box also has a QR code that when scanned takes you to tons more global exploration to immerse yourself in. Everything from film to lifestyle, art to history, it all can be found here. Live your life to the fullest. Subscribe now and don't miss out on the next cultural adventure. Ladybug Collective. Always exploring.
Well, and I already mentioned one, Kristen Kish, right?
Yes.
Who was your typical student like Katrina Markov, who tried traditional education, wasn't for her, and she sort of figured it out. But, on a more personal level, there's one story, one individual that really always touches my heart. His name is Trennan, and Trennan is he's a retired Army captain. He's still very young. He went into the Army at a very young age and retired a captain and served our country and had always wanted to become a pastry cook or chef, right? So he found us. He's from the Southeast part of the country, and he found us and he came to school here, and he and I'm running the business, so I'm not always in the kitchens and such, but Trennan is a pretty eclectic and electric sort of personality, as am I, and we were bound to find each other, and we did. And I just followed his path through, and he volunteered for every opportunity that came up, every single opportunity. And Trennan made his way through the pastry program. He did some really cool things, like working with different chocolatiers in the area. And then he called me up and said, I think I want to come back and learn the other side. And came back, and he's here now currently learning the culinary side. So Trennan's ultimate goal, and I'm going to have to force him to spend some time in the industry, but Trennan would be an incredible teacher, teacher. He teaches his classmates anyway, without any formal guidance and such. So that's a really beautiful story. There's several stories. Here's another one. There's a chef. His name's Andre Natera. Remember when I talked a little bit about going back to teach in Portland?
Yeah.
So this was in the 90s, right? And so Andre was in my first class that I ever taught. And Andre was great. He's one of those guys you just remembered. He was a good student.
Yeah.
He was a little edgy. Fast forward, years go by, and I'm doing some work in the industry. And I remember being on the phone with the Accor Hotel Group. It's a big hotel chain around the world. And the brand that you might recognize is Fairmont. So I'm on with all these people who are about to build this beautiful Fairmont Hotel in Austin, Texas.
Wow.
And so we're going around the room and people are introducing themselves. And then they come to Andre Natera. And he gets the microphone and he says, "Hello, Chef Bachmann, it's Andre." I hadn't heard from him in 20 years, right? there was this beautiful sort of memories and all of that. So he's the chef. He was the opening chef of the Fairmont. He's had a great career.
Wow.
So Andre's been on my show.
Yeah.
And I can share some other information with you later, but he's got a podcast and a presence on social media called Chef's PSA, and he does really well. Big supporter of culinary education, and he's a friend of Escoffier. But that's a beautiful story of someone who kind of means a lot to me, and I've kind of kept track of that person. There's another young man who graduated from here at Escoffier a couple years back. His name's Jordan. And he had some restaurant experience, and he landed in a couple of really fine houses here in the Boulder area, worked for Bobby Stuckey. And today he's running a restaurant that's been open in Boulder for many years. It's right on Pearl Street. It's super popular. He's kind of running the show. It's called Salt. And that's Jordan, just a tremendous human being. Boy, the list goes on. We've got, just with Escoffier alone, we have close to 20,000 graduates already.
Oh my gosh.
All around the country, right? Another beautiful story is a woman, her name is Bekai, and she and her family live in West Africa. And she found us online. And Bekai has her own culinary school in West Africa, and she does beautiful things for local people there. But she wanted to learn a little bit more, and online was the only way that was going to work for her. But last November, she and her husband made the trip from West Africa so that she could walk across the stage for graduation right here in Boulder, Colorado. I've had her on the show as well. Wow. And that's a beautiful story of someone who will be a friend of mine for the rest of my life.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
You need many more minutes for all the stories, right?
I hear you. Well, let's wrap up the storytelling part and say, what significance do you think storytelling holds in the culinary world? How do you weave it into Escoffier? And
God, that's such a good, important, relevant comment, question, right? And it goes back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, Michael, that all we're really asking our faculty to do today is to be facilitators of knowledge. Flip the classroom, right? Perhaps provide your students some information. Could be a video, could be a book, could be an assignment, could be anything. Give it to them in advance. Give them some time to think about it, and then listen to them when they ask questions or they try to peel it apart, right? Not all of our chef instructors are competition medalists, and they're not all Michelin star chefs, and they're not all James Beard Award winners. But what they are is passionate about students and education, and they're great storytellers. And those stories can be as simple as, oh my gosh, I remember one morning when I walked into the kitchen and it was flooded, and we had a banquet coming in of 75 people, and here's what we did, and here's what we didn't do. And students hang on that. Storytelling is critical. It's critical.
Absolutely.
We tell the story of Auguste Escoffier, who's a great storyteller, is Michel Escoffier.
Oh my gosh.
We need to get him on the show. We need to arrange that. He is such a storyteller, especially about his great-grandfather, Auguste, right? Yeah, I don't know that we put it on the job description or anyone puts it on the resume, but you can tell very quickly if somebody applies for a job. And I'm even okay when people are super technical. That's all fine. But you just have to be able to share a story. And it could be very informal, like you were saying at the beginning. Sometimes we don't like scripts. We like to just fly off the cuff, and that's okay too. But
we're flying pretty high today. We're definitely flying high today, which is amazing. It's better than I could have imagined, honestly. It's wonderful.
Stories are beautiful. Stories are great.
Have you ever, speaking of stories, does your school work at all, or are they involved with Toastmasters at all?
The answer is yes. And some of the names will kind of escape me. There are individuals that are involved, and there's been press releases and different individual accolades. For sure. Are you?
Oh, yeah. I've been doing it for 10 years.
Isn't that great?
Toastmasters is what launched my podcast. I
Oh,
had
that's
5
great.
people
That's great. Yeah.
create mission, vision, those kind of things. And
Maybe we can do some things together. That would be kind of fun. If there's
I
somebody
would
really
love it,
neat
Kirk.
and special to
Yeah.
you that we can bring on the show, and
Definitely.
anything like that, just like slow food or regenerative agriculture with Farmer Lee, any of those sorts of topics and themes that we can put in front of students who then take
Mhm.
those themes with them into the industry are really important. So Toastmasters has been around a long time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
They're in over 330 countries, I think.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
It's crazy. We have 100 and I'll get it wrong, but probably 140 clubs from Kent to the Canadian border, which is Kent, Washington,
Kent, Washington. Yeah.
all the way to the Canadian border.
Wow.
And, I've been involved for a long time. And the podcast piece, I'm now in a podcasting Toastmaster group.
Oh, no way.
And I'm going to brag about this interview and the interview I had with Tom Douglas and just share
Oh, this
one of
is
my
great.
dreams. One of my crazy dreams is to go around the world virtually in Toastmasters and inspire other people to start their own podcast. And I'm going to tell the chef's story to do it.
That's
And
amazing. You really enjoy this. I can
I
tell
love
that
it,
you
Kirk.
really, you're just
Yeah.
super comfortable and you're
Very.
just.
It took
having
a while. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, I'm
Imposter
sure.
syndrome,
I'm sure.
breaking imposter
Yeah.
syndrome is tough for a lot of people. And I'm a tech, but I'm also an extrovert. So I kind of have a weird mix.
Yeah.
But I also studied to be a chef. So my mom was an artist and my dad was an engineer. So
Okay.
it's kind of like you get this weird mess, but it's a gift. It's such a special gift.
Did you study formally for culinary school at all?
I did. I went to South Seattle Community College. It was one of the top schools at the time I went.
Very familiar. Very
Yeah.
familiar. Yeah. When I
Amazing.
was in the Portland area, right? Yeah.
We had a year-long waiting list.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got in 6 months somehow. And I went to this thing called the Winter Wonderland Buffet.
Okay.
And it was basically foods from around the world that were prepared by all the students. They had a
students. Yeah.
chocolate pastry program and a regular program. And they had carvings and they had chocolate carvings and ice carvings done by the pastry shop. And
Isn't that
oh my God, it was amazing. And I was hooked. I mean, I was just hooked.
Yeah.
And so I did the whole 2 years and then I got a bachelor's in hotel restaurant administration.
That's great. Yeah.
And eventually I was in Napa Valley and I was assistant manager. And one day there was a drive-by shooting and I was the manager on duty and I broke down. I had a mental breakdown and I gave my notice 2 weeks later and I left the business. And so it's part of my soul. It's
Yeah.
like podcasting for me is healing,
Yeah. Yeah.
talking
No,
to
that's
chefs
beautiful.
and
Yeah.
culinary artists. It's all healing.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's
well
part of-
said. That's well
That's
said.
part of my why, right? And that's why I love it so much. It's very addictive connecting to people all over the world and having these conversations is so unique.
You just said something that's really important that we're beginning to try to answer more frequently than ever before. And that is why. It's the why.
Absolutely. I didn't
People
know my why
ask
when I
why
started.
a lot more than they ever did before. Right.
That's great.
Well, I just think maybe it's a younger generation, but I just think social media and the speed with which information is made available to us is absolutely staggering and stunning. So if a teacher says to a student to review this book or follow this recipe or whatever it is, they have to be prepared with why do I need to read that? And it's not a bad question.
Mhm.
It's not a bad question, right? I'll give you a perfect example. For many years, the standard uniform of the jacket and the black pants or checkered pants and the clogs has been in culinary schools and in many properties where you might work. And then all of a sudden, there's a beautiful clog brand called Dance, right? They're not cheap. They're very
I have them. Yeah.
really expensive, right?
Yep.
But Dansk a few years ago started coming up with some really beautiful different colors and maybe a black clog with a beautiful flower in the back
Mhm.
or just something like that, right? And it wasn't easy for me to get some of my administrators to understand or answer the question, why can't they wear a black clog with a little flower on the back?
Okay.
Right? We
Yeah,
make the
sure.
rules, right? Because guess what? They're going to go back into the industry and they're going to wear whatever they want or whatever
Mhm.
the house suggests they wear, right?
Mhm.
So we still have decorum. We still have keep the bar as high as possible in terms of what the highest level of standards that they might run into when they get into the industry. But I also like to be playful with the students. And wow, those are beautiful $225 clogs. I'm going to go ahead and let you wear them.
I got them and I got hooked on them because of the support too. They, if I remember correctly, they have tremendous support.
Yeah. For your back when you're standing on your feet
Absolutely.
all day. Yeah.
So it's worth it. It's worth the investment, but it
Yeah.
is expensive. So I'm just going to move forward a little bit here. I'd love to know, and I know our listeners would love to know, you have been involved in a lot of culinary organizations, American Academy of Chefs, Disciples of Escoffier, and International Association of Culinary Professionals. Can you talk about one of those or just share a little bit about that experience and how it came to be and what it's like to be involved?
Yeah, I was I was a sponge early on, right? I just wanted to get my hand on anything that taught me more and more connections, right? And the American Culinary Federation was probably the first. My father introduced me to someone who was involved with the American Culinary Federation in Colorado back in 1988. And he was the president of the local chapter at the time. And I didn't really understand it, but what made sense to me is that there was an organization of like-minded cooks and chefs and practitioners of the craft and so on and so forth, that 20,000 strong back then, maybe more, and that every state or many states had smaller chapters that all kind of fed into this national thing. And then, oh my gosh, there is a certification track that you can judge yourself against a set of standards, right? And
oh, wow.
I think in many ways I was motivated, challenged perhaps, that my father had achieved such a high level in this craft. And so when I found the American Culinary Federation, it was kind of a brotherhood. It was kind of, I was in a fraternity in college, and that was all kind of cool and stuff. And I love the kind of the history behind all of that. But the American Culinary Federation, wow. So I can do this, and then there'll be these letters behind my name that say that I'm a certified executive chef. And it was just really important to me. It was important to me to be able to demonstrate to others who had achieved that already that I had this level, right? And so today there's, I think, 14 different levels, starting as CC, a certified COMI. What I love about it is that it's a set of standards that's agreed upon. They're relevant. They make sense. And you have the opportunity to be associated with others that have achieved that, right? It was probably harder years and years ago because we didn't have the internet. So you had to schedule time to be with people.
Good point.
And
good point.
You couldn't just email in your application and all that. So it felt like it was a harder journey, I guess. So when you got that certificate, I can remember the first time I think the first level I achieved. So you can be a member of the American Culinary Federation and never get certified.
Okay.
And you could be a member of the American Culinary Federation and get your academic institution accredited, right? Programmatically accredited. All that stuff was super important to me. So the first level I think I achieved was called Certified Working Chef. And it was mostly because I didn't have all the years of experience. But when I got that certificate, Michael, I went down to the local frame shop and I got the most beautiful, ornate. I had elk and deer and duck flying all over the place.
That's awesome.
And I put that up in the restaurant, and I was just so absolutely proud of it. And some organizations too, like the Disciples of Escoffier.
What's that about? I love the name.
It's about, there's several. It's a whole nother podcast. We can talk about.
Yeah, sure. We're going to wrap up.
The requirements. But more than anything, it's about inviting people who have a love for food. And it's not just the Disciples recognize people in the front of the house as managers. They recognize wine experts. They recognize farmers. Farmer Lee is a disciple of Escoffier.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it's all about food. It's all about our industry. You don't have to win a certain medal or graduate from a culinary school. you are invited into the family of the disciples of Escoffier by
Oh my gosh.
Michelle or me or others.
That's
And it's a
beautiful.
beautiful celebration for your family, for your colleagues, pageantry. That to me is, it's an incredible honor. We were in New York City earlier this year, and we inducted a few people into the disciples. And we were at one of Jean-Georges' facilities.
I interviewed a chef that worked at Jean-Georges. I
Oh
wanted
my
to tell you
gosh.
that. Wow.
This place was so amazing. Jean-Georges was real busy. We had hoped to induct him as well, but he had just opened up something in Asia. And so he just got back. He got back that night.
Yeah.
And he came to the event towards the end. He had a copy of Le Guy wrapped in a rubber band that he had been carrying around, he said, for 30 years.
Gosh.
He undid the rubber band and put these frail pages in front of Michelle and asked him to please sign this copy of Le Guy of his great-grandfather's works. And that is what this industry is all about. And it's not for everyone, right? That's my world, right? That's my world. If I was an artist and I saw a Rembrandt or something that just moved me, right? I can appreciate that. If I was a Major League Baseball player and I was moved by things that Hank Aaron did or Willie Mays or Babe Ruth, I get that. But in my world and those around me, it's about Escoffier. It's about Carême. It's about Thomas Keller. It's about Gavin Kaysen. It's about Kelly Whitaker, Bobby Stock.
Wow.
That's the stuff that just makes me happy.
And that's the question I was dying to ask you, because Kirk, you're such a humble person. I am humble too. So I recognize it.
I just love chatting with you, and you have a great podcast voice, by the way.
That's what people tell me. I'm working on
very
voiceovers.
Soothing. It's very soothing.
You have the same.
I think my heartbeat has gone down because
you have the same, because I see how you can put people at ease, and I do
or asleep, right? I could put them to sleep.
No, I listen to the show when I go to sleep sometimes, and I listen to it while I'm commuting. It's become my favorite show.
I'm so happy that it gives you some peace. And I will say, truth be told, I'm pretty high strung. I'm very ambitious. I'm very,
you got a lot going on.
And my kids call me a cat on a hot tin roof, right? I'm just always moving. But once a week, I'm able to get up at 5 a.m. and spend about 3 hours really just zoning in on who I'm going to speak with in a few hours, right? And I try not to do it too early or too late. Usually I have a pretty good idea of who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
And then for that hour and a half, nothing can bother me. So I'm sitting right here outside of what we call the K4 kitchen 4, which is our pastry kitchen.
Okay.
There's Chef Sarah right there waving at me. So I put a sign in the window that says podcast recording in session. I've got a little on-air sign.
I need that.
Yeah, it's fun, right? But sometimes the students will come by and they'll try to make me laugh, right?
Yep.
Kind of do. I sit in kind of a glass bubble here.
Okay.
And you can see there's my man right there, Marco Pierre White. Most people ask about Marco Pierre White.
I was going to ask. Can you tell me a little bit?
I have a fun story about him as well. And so it is humble. We're just trying to help people understand how to follow their dreams, right?
It's awesome.
So I could be a carpentry school and we do it exactly the same way, right?
Okay, the last question, because I want to respect your time. What has been your proudest moment as a president, as a chef, or as a podcaster? All of them? Any of them?
Yeah, there's a lot of proud moments. I would be remiss if I didn't say, and I'll get emotional probably, but...
Good. I'm already emotional, so...
I think you have to mention how proud you are to be a parent. Right? Be a husband. Sorry, I get emotional.
It's okay.
Because they're a part of all this. They're a part. And my wife never asks me to leave it at the door. She doesn't. There's things that happen every day that are insane, right? And so I have 4 children and 4 grandchildren.
Okay.
I love them very much. So that's my pride right there, right?
Yeah.
But I'd be an idiot if I didn't say graduation is... And no in particular graduation, every graduation is so important. And People come to us from all walks of life. Some have more than others. Others have less than others. But when they get into that beautiful hall on the campus of Colorado University, Mackey Arena, we're all the same. We're all the same. It's like a soccer game in Bath or in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
People are screaming and yelling for each other. And we have students speak, and I speak, and we have Farmer Lee speak. And I have a beautiful friend of mine. Her name is Sylvia. She's an opera singer, and she sings. Sometimes she sings in French if Michel Escoffier comes.
Mm-hmm.
That's my proudest moment. And Michael, the microphone that day is mine. No one else's.
Yeah.
No one else's. I tell the story. I confer upon them, the students, the graduates, their degrees or their diplomas. And we take pictures with their families. We hug their families.
Beautiful.
We hug each other. That's hands down the proudest moment. There's other pinnacle moments when we have the Department of Education of the state of Colorado come in and let us know that we're operating on all cylinders, or our national accreditor comes in and says, after a long review, that we have 14 strengths and we're just operating at the highest level. Yeah, those are all proud moments. A lot of work goes into all of that. I'm so thankful for the teams around me for that.
Yeah.
But graduation, the culmination of dreams, of plans, there's nothing that beats that.
That's amazing. And that's basically going to take us out. But the one thing I want to ask you is, how can we support you and your community at large?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak in general. It's a really good question. I wasn't prepared for that. But what I would say is put food first. It's a really tough business. It's a really tough business, but it's beautiful. Visit your local farms. Visit your local restaurants that are using local farms to serve you. Thank people. One thing that Kelly said yesterday, and I'm just going to repeat it. He said, appreciate restaurant economics, right? It's really hard. It's really hard.
Especially now.
Provide contributing conversation. Leave more than you take away.
Oh, that is such a beautiful takeaway.
So it's my new mantra from Kelly Whitaker. Leave more.
Kelly, wow. That's beautiful. That was really thought-provoking.
Yeah. Sorry about the emotion there.
I love it because I'm a very emotional person too. And I just want to say, when I started this podcast, I had dreams of people I wanted to interview. Jose Andre, Tom Douglas. I just interviewed Tom Douglas. And then I met you. And I'm just like the president of the Escoffier Institute. He has his own podcast called The Ultimate Dish, which you need to check out, by the way. It's incredible. And I look at my why, and this is my why. My why is to connect to chefs, culinary artists, and people who support the Chef Circle that are doing something incredible with their talents. They're giving back. They're doing amazing things. And I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I can't thank Kristen enough for reaching out. I will treasure this forever. And you are truly a voice for chefs. And thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the connection. I hope we can stay in touch.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us today. Follow us on Facebook. Find our website in the show notes. Subscribe on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen. Leave a comment with 5 stars. And stay tuned for the next episode of Voice for Chefs.